How does a warrior sworn to defend his nation transform into a headline that chills it to the bone? From Civil War conspirators to modern-day combat killers, our countdown maps every betrayal etched into U.S. military history. You'll meet soldiers whose crimes range from village massacres and grenade ambushes to code leaks that rattled Washington. Stay with us till the last name, because one verdict still splits veterans' halls down the middle. Robert Bales. It was supposed to be another moonless night at Camp Belembay, Afghanistan, until Staff Sergeant Robert Bales slipped away from his outpost and into infamy. Armed with an M4 and night vision goggles, he crept into 2 neighboring villages and murdered 16 Afghan civilians, most of them children, while their families slept. Eyewitnesses remember flames licking the darkness as Bales set bodies alight, returning to base with the ghostly smell of kerosene on his clothes. The Army quickly pieced the carnage to their missing soldier. Thermal cameras tracked his lone silhouette crossing open fields, and blood spatters stained the inside of his trousers. Captured without resistance, Bales claimed memory blackouts. But the forensic trail, satellite imagery, and villagers' anguished testimony crushed any defense. In 2013, a military jury spared him the death penalty, but sentenced him to life without parole at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth. Inside those concrete walls, the one-time family man now awakens each dawn to the echo of steel doors and the unbearable knowledge that his name has become a byword for betrayal on both sides of the war. William Callie, March 16, 1968. Helicopters roar over the Vietnamese hamlet of My Lai, rotors kicking up dust and dread. Platoon leader Lieutenant William Callie orders his men to herd unarmed villagers into a drainage ditch, then unleashes automatic fire. By noon, more than 500 civilians lie dead. Months later, a lone letter from helicopter door gunner Ron Ridenour sparks a Pentagon inquiry. Photographs smuggled out by Army journalist Ron Habro, coupled with surviving villagers' raw testimonies, corner Callie in the glare of a global spotlight. Court-martialed in 1971, he pleads he was only following orders, but a panel of 6 officers rules otherwise, guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to life at hard labor. Political pressure sees President Nixon commute his punishment to 3 years house arrest. Yet, Callie's name remains etched on the darkest page of American military history, a cautionary tale whispered in every ethics class at West Point. Ilsa Ko. Before the liberation of Buchenwald, inmates whispered that Commandant's wife Ilsa Ko collected human skin like a macabre hobbyist collects stamps. Rumors spoke of lampshades fashioned from prisoners' tattooed flesh, of a sadistic smile prowling the barracks on horseback, whip in hand. When American troops stormed the camp in April 1945, they froze at piles of parchment-smooth hide and her luxurious estate overlooking the misery below. The U.S. Army arrested Koch and hauled her before the Dachau Military Tribunal, where survivors testified to her thirst for cruelty. She allegedly pointed out interesting tattoos for guards to flay. Convicted of participating in a common design to commit war crimes, Koch received life imprisonment, later reduced to 4 years, then reinstated by a West German court in 1951. She hanged herself in 1967, but photographs of those grotesque artifacts endure, a nightmarish scrapbook reminding the world that evil can hide behind manicured smiles and silken gowns. Zep Dietrich. Joseph Zep. Dietrich marched from beer hall brawler to commander of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte, Hitler's elite bodyguard unit. His troops spearheaded the 1944 Malmedy massacre, where 84 American POWs were machine-gunned in a snowy Belgian field. After the war, U.S. prosecutors at Dachau unfurled aerial recon photos, shell casings, and survivor depositions that placed Dietrich near the killing grounds. Though he argued he hadn't issued the explicit order, the command responsibility doctrine sealed his fate. Sentenced to life in 1946, later commuted to 25 years, he served roughly a decade in Landsberg prison, the same fortress once occupied by Adolf Hitler himself. Fellow inmates recall him strutting the exercise yard with a boxer's swagger, still addressing guards as subordinates. Released in 1955, Dietrich died quietly in Munich 4 years later, but the image of an SS Titan reduced to stamping license plates inside an American-run jail remains a potent symbol of justice overtaking tyranny. Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs, Kandahar's Maiwand District, 2010. Soldiers whispered about a grisly trophy game. Finger bones, teeth, photos with corpses. At the center stood Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs, a charismatic Montana native who dared younger troops to stage murders for sport. Investigators uncovered 3 Afghan civilians baited with grenades, executed, then posed beside their killers. In 2011, a military jury convicted Gibbs on 15 counts, including premeditated murder and mutilation. Life with parole after 20 years followed, along with a dishonorable discharge that stripped every ribbon from his chest. Yet Gibbs' supporters still lobby for clemency, claiming coercion and flimsy forensics. Multiple appeals flicker through federal courts, leaving families of the dead and the soldiers who testified against him trapped in a purgatory of unanswered morality. Specialist Ryan G. Anderson. A history buff turned convert to Islam, Ryan Gibson Anderson sat in a Washington apartment in 2004, live-streaming tank-killing diagrams to what he believed were al-Qaeda handlers. They were undercover FBI agents. Arrested just days before his guard unit shipped to Iraq, Anderson faced a 9-officer panel that watched chilling tapes of him vowing to defect and train mujahideen. The defense pleaded bipolar disorder and Asperger's. Prosecutors countered with Anderson's own words, "I wish to desert. I wish to kill U.S. soldiers." The jury needed barely 5 hours. Life with parole, rank reduced to private, a dishonorable discharge, and an eternity behind Leavenworth's walls. His wife later earned a counseling degree near the prison so she could visit. Each Monday she still passes concrete barriers, wrestling with how the man she married became an enemy within. Sergeant Derek Miller, Logman Province, Afghanistan, 26 September 2010. As dusk settled, Sergeant Derek Miller interrogated a suspected Taliban scout who had breached a mortar perimeter. Minutes later, a single 9mm round pierced the detainee's skull. Miller argued self-defense. The man lunged for his sidearm, he said, but a fellow guardsman testified the suspect lay helpless on his back. Convicted of premeditated murder, Miller received life with parole and joined the so-called Leavenworth 10. Veterans groups rallied, citing the firefight that erupted an hour after the shooting, as proof the man was indeed hostile. After 8 years, parole set him free in 2019. He now lobbies Congress for warrior-friendly rules of engagement, haunted by battlefield seconds that rewrote his life. Sergeant John M. Russell, a 44-year-old communications NCO on his 3rd Iraq deployment, John M. Russell had been spiraling for weeks. Insomnia, depression, and an open loathing for the mental health staff who kept declaring him unfit for duty. On 11 May 2009, as an escort drove him away from the combat stress clinic outside Baghdad, Russell seized an unsecured M16, doubled back, and opened fire on the very counselors trying to save him. 5 U.S. service members fell in seconds, their blood splashed across posters that read, "Seek help, it's not weakness." Investigators called it the deadliest act of soldier-on-soldier violence of the entire war. In 2013, a military judge branded the murders premeditated and locked Russell away for life, without parole, at Fort Leavenworth, a ruling that ignited national debate over combat PTSD and the Army's overwhelmed mental health pipeline. First Sergeant John E. Hatley, Baghdad Surge, spring 2007. Insurgent bombs kept ripping Alpha Company apart. First Sergeant Hatley, a highly decorated 20-year veteran, decided the rules no longer applied. After a dusk firefight, 4 detainees, blindfolded and zip-tied, were marched to an isolated irrigation canal. Hatley and 2 subordinates executed the prisoners with 9mm sidearms, dumped the bodies, and swore an oath of silence. 2 years later, a tormented squadmate finally confessed, forcing the Army to exhume testimonies long buried by fear. A Vilsec, Germany court-martial sentenced Hatley to life, stripped every stripe from his uniform, and sent him to Leavenworth, where he spent 11 years before parole, but continues to battle for a presidential pardon, claiming the killings never happened. His case still divides veterans between those who call him a war criminal and those who hail him a scapegoat of chaotic counterinsurgency. A Aguigi, Fort Stewart, Georgia, July 2011. 7 months pregnant, Sergeant Deirdre Aguigi lay dead on her apartment floor, a computer cord still biting into her neck. Her husband, 22-year-old PFC Isaac Aguigi, told investigators it was rough sex gone wrong. What he hid was a spreadsheet showing how her $500,000 life insurance payout would bankroll FEAR, a secret anti-government militia he was assembling with disillusioned soldiers. Medical experts battled over cause of death, but an Army judge called it murder and unborn child homicide, mandating life without parole. Months later, Aguigi ordered 2 followers to silence a former soldier and his teenage girlfriend, who threatened to expose the plot. Both were executed in rural Georgia. With multiple life sentences stacking atop one another, Aguigi now stews in a maximum security cell. His militia dismantled. Yet victims' families say the aftershocks of his greed-driven rampage still reverberate through the base. Calvin Neal Glover, Delta Company, Barracks, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, 5 July 1999. Intoxicated 19-year-old private first class. Calvin Glover staggered through the corridor clutching a Louisville Slugger. Moments later, he bludgeoned fellow infantryman Barry Winchell to death as Winchell slept. His motive: vicious taunts about Winchell's relationship with transgender performer Calpurnia Adams. The killing ignited national fury over the Army's "don't ask, don't tell" policy, exposing a toxic brew of homophobia and hazing. Court-martial jurors rejected Glover's pleas of drunken impulsivity and sentenced him to life with parole possible after 15 years. They also booted him from the Army in disgrace. Winchell's mother would later tell Congress her son died by a policy that forced silence. Glover paroled out in 2020, but LGBTQ advocates still cite Barry Winchell's name whenever military equality is debated. Corporal Clayton A. Fountain. Born on Fort Benning soil, Clayton Fountain grew up a sergeant's son before enlisting in the Marines and spiraling into psychotic violence. In 1974, while posted in the Philippines, he shot his staff sergeant during a robbery, then took hostages, earning a life sentence. But prison only magnified his brutality. Over 9 years at USP Marion, he murdered 3 inmates and, in 1983, stabbed guard Robert Hoffman to death, prompting a nationwide prison lockdown and inspiring the creation of Supermax isolation at ADX Florence. Authorities welded Fountain into a specially built steel and concrete cell where he lived 23-hour days alone for 2 decades. Astonishingly, he converted to Catholicism, earned college degrees by correspondence, and was posthumously accepted as a Trappist lay brother after dying of a heart attack in 2004. Scholars still argue whether Fountain's cloistered redemption proves even the worst killer can change, or whether it merely shows what happens when a human mind is sealed away from the world forever. First Lieutenant Clint Lawrence. 3 days into taking command of a beleaguered platoon near Kandahar in July 2012, First Lieutenant Clint Lawrence ordered a gun truck to open fire on 3 Afghan men idling on a dusty road. Men his own scouts said were unarmed civilians, not insurgent spotters. 2 died in seconds. A third fled wounded. In court-martial testimony, Lawrence's troopers wept as they described stuffing weapons beside the bodies to clean up the kill scene. Orders, they said, that came straight from their rookie lieutenant. A Fort Bragg jury convicted him of second-degree murder and handed down a 19-year sentence, later trimmed to 17 and served at Leavenworth. Veterans split violently. Some branded him a war criminal, others a scapegoat of impossible rules. In November 2019, President Trump issued a full pardon, unleashing another storm of opinion pieces and divided Gold Star families. Lawrence, now free but still ostracized by many in his old platoon, tells interviewers he sleeps with ghosts who question every order. Specialist Jeremy Morlock. To buddies at Joint Base Lewis McChord, he was the Joker nicknamed Morlock Holmes. In Kandahar's Maiwan district, he became the apprentice to Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs, posing Afghan civilians like hunting trophies after staged grenade ambushes. Morlock appeared on gruesome photographs, grinning beside mutilated corpses, images so incendiary the Pentagon fought to keep them from Afghan media. At a 2011 court-martial, he pled guilty to 3 murders, conspiracy and drug abuse, taking a 24-year deal in exchange for testifying against the rest of the kill team. Before sentencing, he told the judge, "I've become a danger to everyone around me." Now, held at Leavenworth, Morlock will first taste parole eligibility in 2031. If he can convince a review board, he no longer measures humanity in body parts. Private First Class Bradley. Long nights inside a drab phobie near Baghdad found 22-year-old intel analyst Bradley Manning copying war logs and diplomatic cables onto a Lady Gaga CD, convinced the raw truth of Iraq and Afghanistan must reach the world. In 2010, WikiLeaks detonated those secrets across the internet, from the collateral murder gun camera video to dossiers on detainee abuse. Arrested at Contingency Operating Station Hammer, Manning faced 22 charges, including Espionage Act counts, and a potential life term. A 2013 Fort Meade judge sentenced the soldier to 35 years, reduced rank, and dishonorable discharge, while rejecting the most serious aiding the enemy charge. Civil liberties advocates called it excessive. Generals called it lenient. President Obama commuted the sentence after 7 years, citing disproportionate punishment. Manning's release in 2017 sparked fresh ideological firefights: traitor or whistleblower, hero or hacker undone by private torment. The debate, like the leaked cables, remains permanently online. First Lieutenant Michael Behenna, May 16, 2008, Baiji, Iraq. An Iraqi detainee named Ali Mansour stood stripped beneath a railroad bridge as Lieutenant Michael Behenna confronted him over an IED that had killed 2 of Behenna's men weeks earlier. Minutes later, Mansour lay dead, shot twice, his body burned with a thermite grenade. Behenna insisted self-defense. Prosecutors said it was an execution and cover-up. A 2009 military jury agreed. handing him 25 years. Families of the fallen 101st Airborne soldiers rallied behind the officer. Human rights lawyers warned the conviction proved battlefield stress could never excuse murder. After 5 years in Leavenworth, Behenna paroled out, only to receive a controversial full pardon from President Trump in 2019, reigniting the question: does a pardon erase a bullet still lodged in a nation's conscience? Sergeant Hassan Akbar. Just before the 2003 invasion of Iraq, tents at Camp Pennsylvania, Kuwait, glowed with soldiers writing goodbye letters. Around 1 a.m., Sergeant Hassan Akbar, angry, paranoid, and estranged from his unit, pulled grenade pins and hurled them into the sleeping command post, then raked survivors with an M4. 2 officers died. 14 comrades bled beside scattered gear lists and burning canvas. Court documents revealed diary entries. "My life will not be in danger if I don't kill any soldiers." The 2005 court-martial sentenced him to death, the first U.S. soldier condemned for murdering fellow troops since Vietnam. Appeals courts have repeatedly upheld the verdict. Akbar waits on the military's tiny death row at Fort Leavenworth, where the silence between steel doors is punctuated only by distant range fire and memories of a night when war came from within. Specialist William Henry Hance. Fort Benning, 1978. Police chiefs received taunting notes on Army stationery signed by a phantom vigilante gang called the Forces of Evil. Threats so lurid they seemed ripped from pulp fiction. Yet handwriting, shoe prints, and taped phone calls pointed to a single 26-year-old truck driver, Specialist. William Hance, a Marine-turned-soldier with a 79 IQ and a history of soliciting sex workers near the base. When agents confronted him, Hance broke, confessing to 3 murders and hinting at a possible 4th stretching up to Fort Benjamin Harrison. A military court-martial gave him life for killing private. Karen Hickman. A Georgia jury later added a death sentence for prostitute Gail Jackson, whose corpse he'd staged as a hostage. Though civilian appeals dragged for years, the electric chair finally snapped shut on March 31, 1994, making Hance the only U.S. soldier serial killer ever executed in a state prison. Even now, criminologists replay his Forces of Evil ruse as a chilling study in how a low-ranking GI manipulated 2 legal systems before justice caught up. Sergeant Horus T. West. Sicily, July 14, 1943. Exhausted 45th Division troops herded 45 Italian and 3 German POWs toward an olive grove. Moments later, Sergeant Horus T. West emptied an entire Thompson magazine, reloaded, and calmly shot each wounded captive through the heart. Army chaplain sounded the alarm, forcing General George S. Patton to order the very court-martial he'd hoped to dodge. West was convicted of 37 counts of premeditated murder and handed a life term, shackled in a North African cage to keep reporters at bay. Then came a twist worthy of film noir. In November 1944, Allied headquarters quietly remitted his sentence, citing morale and manpower needs, and restored him to duty for the rest of the war. West died an obscure Oklahoma civilian in 1974, proof that some wartime secrets slipped back into the ranks instead of the grave. Private Roy Tyler. The Houston riot of 1917 exploded after white police pistol-whipped black soldiers from the 24th Infantry. 63 men, including Kentuckian Private Roy Tyler, drew life sentences for mutiny in the largest court-martial in U.S. history. Locked in Leavenworth, Tyler found salvation on a scrubbed dirt baseball diamond, smashing fastballs for the prison team nicknamed the Booker T's. Negro League magnate Rube Foster spotted his 300 swing and persuaded officials to parole Tyler in 1924, so he could patrol center field for the Chicago American Giants. freedom proved fickle. A parole violation sent him back behind bars until 1936, after which he drifted through minor clubs and odd jobs before dying in Kalamazoo at 84. A century later, the Army vacated all riot convictions, officially admitting racism had warped the trial, giving Tyler, posthumously, the honorable discharge he never lived to salute. Private Samuel Bland Arnold. Long before gunshots rang out at Ford's Theater, John Wilkes Booth convened co-conspirators at a Pennsylvania Avenue restaurant to hatch an audacious plan: snatch President Lincoln and trade him for Confederate POWs. Among the plotters sat former Confederate infantryman Sam Arnold, recently discharged for ill health, yet still burning with rebel zeal. When the abduction scheme fizzled, Arnold took a desk job at Old Point Comfort, an alibi that saved him from the gallows after Booth pivoted to assassination. Still, a military tribunal convicted him of conspiracy and shipped him to the sun-blasted fortress of Dry Tortugas for life at hard labor. He nearly perished from yellow fever but survived until 1869, when Andrew Johnson's pardons cracked Fort Jefferson's cell doors. Arnold spent his twilight years in Baltimore, writing a memoir that begged Americans to remember him as a misguided soldier, not a presidential butcher, a plea history still debates. Private Michael Olaflin. Booth's boyhood friend Mike Olaflin joined the Confederate Army at 21, mustering out in 1862 but never abandoning the cause. By 1864, he was back in Booth's orbit, bankroll in hand, shadow plotting kidnapping routes through Washington's dim alleys. After Lincoln's murder, Olaflin surrendered, insisting he'd quit the conspiracy weeks earlier. Witnesses disagreed, and a 9-officer commission branded him guilty, sentencing him to life in the humid isolation of Fort Jefferson beside Arnold and Dr. Samuel Mudd. In August 1867, yellow fever ripped through the garrison. Olaflin nursed fellow prisoners until the virus claimed him at just 27, effectively turning a life sentence into a lingering death. His body sailed home to Baltimore, where he now lies steps from Booth's own grave, a tragic footnote that underscores how loyalty, when chained to fanaticism, can corrode a life faster than any iron lock. These cases prove heroism and horror can share the same insignia. When an oath shatters, the courtroom becomes the final battlefield, and the sentence a lifelong echo of broken trust. Tell us which story stunned you most. Subscribe for deeper dives, and remember, vigilance begins with knowing history's darkest chapters.